His coverage of the Pittsburgh Steelers is among the best on all of the internet. He's the one and only Alex Kozora of Steelers Depot. Alex, thanks for joining the program this morning. Good to see you again, my friend.
Mark, too kind. Appreciate you having me on.
Alex, let's start here in the aftermath of the George Pickens trade. What do you make of his comments on Instagram?
Well, I think they're in dispute right now. I don't think anyone can say with certainty if that was actually his comment he deleted or somebody pretending to be him. I know for us and our site, we did not write about the initial comments because we could not independently verify if they were his or not. It seemed to be in a later Instagram story he denied making those comments. And so I really can't say for sure if he did or not. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but bottom line is George Pickens is gone. And so my focus has been less on what Pickens offered and what he's saying and more about how Pittsburgh replaces George Pickens.
Yeah, I'm with you there because that's like my next question is a huge thing going in for the Steelers this year was, okay, what's wide receiver 3 look like? Perhaps the slot, if you have the tandem of a DK Metcalf and a George Pickens. Now it looks like, what are the Steelers doing at the wide receiver 2 position?
It's a great question, and it just feels like deja vu to last year where Pittsburgh expressing internal confidence in their group, not ruling out outside options, and now we wait. I assume they're going to go through OTAs and look at Roman Wilson in a critical year 2 for him, a guy that played all of 5 offensive snaps last year, was injured in training camp throughout the season. Calvin Austin had his breakout year, but is that enough, and is there enough confidence? And my concern, Mark, is I understand why Pittsburgh traded George Pickens. It is not hard to understand the reasons why Pickens was dealt. He was not going to be re-signed. He was a headache. Dude racked up penalties and fines and was late and all the like. But I was looking forward to an offense that could finally be potent and explosive with Pickens on one side, Metcalf on the other. It's going to lighten the box, create 2 high shells. Can you get the same out of Austin and Wilson and whoever else? They're confident. I'm less so. So we'll see. But it seems like the first step for Pittsburgh will be focusing on internal options, and that really centers on Roman Wilson.
Yeah, Wilson's a big one. And then Robert Woods, free agent signing as well. But I've said this on my show here, Alex, and this is with respect to Robert Woods, but it feels very Allen Robinson. It feels very Van Jefferson, where it's a very cheap contract. So I'm not expecting a whole lot. Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised. But it's the same issues that plagued this offense a year ago, and just replace George Pickens with DK Metcalf, and opposing defenses are going to be able to bracket and double team DK.
And that is the concern. And Pittsburgh has to solve that. And so either their confidence has to be proven true or some external outside move has to occur. And so with Woods, you're right. I mean, it is literally just Jefferson and Robinson 2.0, right down to the ex-Ram part of their resume. So he's a blocker. He's a veteran. He can sit down in zone. He can move the chains on 3rd and 5. Not going to do much beyond that. And so there'll be a role for him, but he certainly should not be this team's number 2 the way Van Jefferson was last year, who's a good guy, a good blocker, but just the emptiest route runner. Over 700 snaps last year, Jefferson played and caught all of 24 passes. Pittsburgh can't get that production from their number 2. So Arthur Smith loves the veteran receivers that can block, and so I understand the fit there, and it certainly makes more sense post-Pickens trade, but Woods is not going to be the answer.
What did you make of the fact that the Steelers dealt Pickens after the NFL draft versus either before it or during it?
There's some nuance here. I understand it appears to be the offers they got, and even from Dallas themselves, were not good enough during the draft. No one wanted to trade Pickens for a 4th-round pick, and that's some of the reporting that came out during the draft. And so I understand the value and the art of being patient post-draft to get that future 3rd-round pick. You get more 2026 capital, but to potentially move up for that quarterback move in next year's draft. But to me, that's a bit of a false choice of trade Pickens for a 4th during the draft or a 3rd after. You could also not trade George Pickens and try to roll out this year with Pickens and let him walk after this season. Maybe they felt that was untenable. I don't know exactly for sure, obviously, what all happened. I'm sure. I mean, we've heard kind of the stories about Pickens from our outside perspective. I can only imagine what's happening that we don't know about that happened inside that locker room. But it just felt like to do that post-draft, you went down the same road as last year of, again, how do you replace Pickens, and doing that post-draft, post the bulk of free agency, makes that mission a lot harder. Maybe again, they're super confident in what they have internally, but they better be, and they better be right about that. Because as you said, Mark, you can't go down this path of last year.
Unless there's another move on the horizon. I know Gabe Davis is out there, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, all free agent players. When this happened in the immediate aftermath, my first thought process, Alex, was like, why would Aaron Rodgers want to come to a team with one fewer dynamic playmaker on the outside at the age of 41? He's turning 42 during the season. To me, unless or if one of Rodgers' guys, whether I've heard the jokes about Randall Cobb on my Twitter feed, I've heard the jokes about getting Alan Lazard over here, unless there's another move to be made that we don't know about at this point in time, I don't see why why this would make Pittsburgh more desirable for him to sign with Pittsburgh as a free agent. What say you about that?
I agree, Mark. I think Rodgers wants to play for a contender, and you subtract a potent weapon in Pickens, it doesn't help that cause. Now, do I think this will prevent Rodgers from signing? I don't. And to play devil's advocate, you could sit there and say, did Rodgers want to go and deal with George Pickens and have that combustible situation of if Pickens gets angry and Rodgers has to deal with that? Maybe that's for the best, because Rodgers probably would have said something honest on the Pat McAfee show, and you and I would have been talking in November about Aaron Rodgers' comments about George Pickens. So you could look at it from that perspective as well. But yeah, I think, Omar Khan had said at the Combine his offseason goal, and rightfully so, was to add playmakers. And you did that in adding DK Metcalf and drafting Caleb Johnson, even to a lesser extent signing running back Kenneth Gainwell. And then you trade one of your biggest offensive playmakers for understandable reasons. But the whole point has to be, how do you replace that playmaking ability in the lineup? Because this offense has just been so underwhelming, poor, bad, whatever adjective you want to use, you're correct, since basically 2018. And I just thought this was going to be the 1 year where the offense could elevate, could be potent, and at least more interesting. If the defense rebounds, you have a recipe to win a playoff game. You're in the divisional round. You're one of the final 8. You have a chance at that point. And to lose Pickens, it certainly hurts that cause on the field. And you wonder, is another team that's spinning their tires. And just last thought quickly, like, what is the plan for Pittsburgh this year? You're pursuing Rodgers to win now, presumably, and then you trade Pickens for future assets. So are you in this year? Are you out this year? I'm trying to figure out the direction of the team, and I'm having trouble, thinking about Rodgers on one hand and then trading Pickens on the other. They just don't mesh philosophically.
I think with the 12 draft picks for 2026, that writing's on the wall, and you've got the backdrop. It might seem corny. You might say, hey, there's great fanfare in going to get your quarterback of the future and drafting a quarterback again next year. Now, the thing that I think you hit on, Alex, is this. I will say lack of offensive identity. And you said the 2018 season, that was the last time the Steelers had an offensive player who was an all-pro, and that was Marquise Pouncey. He was a second-team all-pro player. You've got to go back to the year before in 2017 where you had AB, Le'Veon Bell, and David DeCastro, all first-team all-pro players. They haven't had one since those 2 years. So you've lacked offensive identity up front. Your point about Rodgers going on the McAfee show, we saw that all too well, too. It wasn't on the McAfee show, but it was post-game where Mike Williams, who then got dealt to the Steelers, runs the wrong route. And post-game, Rodgers, I'll say he hung his guy out to dry, because I understand there's context. I understand there's nuance in the post-game interview, but Rodgers has been in the league long enough to know what he was doing post-game and how he answered the question honestly. But you want to be able to be a good teammate. You got to be the CEO, the face of the franchise as a quarterback. So to potentially deal with that, if Rodgers had to do that with Pickens this coming season, had Pittsburgh hung on to GP, I think those are all fair points, Alex.
Yeah, and Rodgers is not going to change his stripe should he come to Pittsburgh. He will answer the question honestly as asked, for better or for worse. And I'll say this as it applies to Roman Wilson. While, Wilson, I think, is a smart dude, and we'll see how he looks this year. I just want to I want to see him in pads. I haven't seen him in pads, in his first season. Obviously, he got hurt in his first padded practice last year. Typically, young receivers don't mesh well with Aaron Rodgers, because Rodgers has that high standard of, you better know every call, every check, every sight adjustment, be precise with your routes, be detailed. And Roman Wilson has to be able to show that right away. If not, it's going to be hard for a young guy, an effective redshirt rookie like Wilson to get in the lineup to earn Rodgers' trust and to play. And so could that lead Pittsburgh to get the band back together for Rodgers' former teammates, like you said, Alan Lazard or somebody like that? It just feels so every Adam Sandler movie that just brings in like his guys, like there's Rob Schneider, like that. It's just every Happy Madison production. It feels like that's what's happening with Aaron Rodgers. And I just don't want to cater every roster whim to Aaron Rodgers for a 1-year play.
Very nice. We're saying Rod Snyder's very, very nice. Yeah. Oh man, that's terrific. I like that analogy. Hey, I got to give a shout out to Christopher Carter over at Locked On Steelers and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I thought that the compensation was fair for George Pickens, what they got back in return, 3rd round pick and then a late round draft swap. It's crazy to me, though, that in retrospect of all the receivers that the Steelers have dealt through the years, that Chase Claypool got the most compensation back with the 2nd round pick. It's clear if you go through the receivers year over year of when they're in Pittsburgh versus when they leave Pittsburgh, to make another analogy, it's like putting on the Superman cape when you're in the black and gold, because you're going to put up huge numbers. AB, Mike Wallace, San Antonio Holmes, Juju, GP, Deontay Johnson, Martavis Bryant, Chase Claypool. They all had lower average receiving totals after the fact when they left Pittsburgh versus beforehand. So I know I have confidence that the Steelers know what they're doing in terms of when to keep a guy and when to unload a guy. I mean, the moment they got DK and they signed DK to that huge contract extension, it was like, to me, the writing was on the wall that George Pickens wouldn't be in a Steelers uniform for much longer. I didn't know if they would trade him necessarily like they did, but at best they could maybe franchise tag him after the season if he were to play out the final year of his rookie deal, or if he took a steep discount, probably less than what he wants to make on an open market.
Once Metcalf was acquired, there was no way they were extending George Pickens. I mean, even Art Rooney had talked about that even before the Metcalf trade of like, we'll let things play out with George. And so I thought either trade, or I thought more likely he was going to stay. Pickens was this year. And if the offer wasn't good enough, maybe Pickens would have stayed a Steeler. But you're right, Mark. It is crazy to see the history of how every story ends with these kind of malcontent, difficult receivers. And you kind of wonder, why do teams keep acquiring them? Because if Pittsburgh's selling a receiver, like that is a bad warning sign. And not only to your point about those receivers having less production, many of them had almost no production. Claypool was a mess in Chicago. AB went AWOL, never played a down for the Raiders. Martavis Bryant got suspended. Deontay Johnson played half a season of, forgettable snaps. And so it's not just lower production. It's either just no production or just a complete disaster. I don't know if Pickens will get to that point. We'll see. Dallas will be interesting how that all gets handled in that big media market. But yeah, it is crazy to kind of see the history, and you do kind of wonder why teams keep trading for Steelers wide receivers.
Alex, if I was in the Chicago Bears front office and I saw the 412 area code, I wouldn't even answer the phone.
Should block that 412 for sure, because there's been some horror stories there.
Well, between the Claypool deal and the Justin Fields deal, I mean, say what you want about Fields. It's crazy to me where you see what his value was this offseason, getting a pretty lucrative contract extension, versus the year before, nobody even wanted him. And the Steelers effectively trade away a 6th round pick for a guy who made 6 starts, went 4-2. I mean, he didn't play all pro level football, but he's certainly capable of being a starting quarterback.
And to turn that pick into a, at worst, 4th round comp pick for 2026. And so you really net ahead in terms of the trade minutia of it all. Yeah, I thought, for all the crap Arthur Smith got, and rightfully so, there were certainly a lot of problems in year 1 as OC. He can develop some of these young quarterbacks. Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. I thought Fields made progress. As you said, not all pro, not pretending Justin Fields was the savior, the long-term answer who got away, but there certainly was progress. When you give a guy structure and stability, that does a quarterback a lot of good. That's what Pittsburgh gave Fields those first 6 weeks, and you saw improvement. So happy for him. Wish him well with the Jets.
So let's give you the keys to the Cadillac here, Alex. If Omar Khan calls you and says, Alex, what should we do at the receiver position for 2025? In an ideal world, what would you have the Steelers do, considering the situation that they're in right now?
build a time machine, go back and not trade George Pickens. I mean, I get why they did it. I really do, but I just have a lot of question marks because you're not in an ideal situation. You're in May 12th and you don't know who your quarterback is as of this recording. You don't know who your number 2 receiver is. None of those things are ideal. So again, I think you go back, you go through OTAs, which will begin the end of the month of May. You look at Roman Wilson, you look at Calvin Austin, your internal options. How do these guys at least look? They get some lay of the land. And if you want to add from there, you may. I probably would go try to sign Gabe Davis if his knee's okay. He's coming off a meniscus tear. He can be that vertical threat that can help, again, do some of those things that Pickens was able to do at a lower level, albeit, but be a vertical guy that can force teams to play more too high shells. That may be my first call. Could you look for a trade partner? The Packers have an abundance of receivers. Romeo Doubs could be an option. But there really aren't a lot of great moves in terms of, oh, just do this and you're fixing the situation. So start internally, look at your own roster, and then go from there. Maybe bring in an outsider. Maybe if things still don't look good by the summer, late summer training camp, then you may consider a trade.
Hey, I mentioned the Superman cape earlier, Alex. So we'll see what we can do there in terms of turning back time. I do want to get to the defensive side of the ball, but I do want to ask you this because I'm not sure if we'll be able to talk for whenever Rodgers makes a decision. What do you think Aaron Rodgers will do?
I wish I was going to say, I wish it was in his head, but now I kind of don't want to be in his head because it seems like there's a lot going on there, but no one knows. I don't have any inside information, obviously, but I am working under the assumption that the team I Bleav is working under that Rodgers will eventually sign. When that'll be, I don't know. For me personally, I want Rodgers and really kind of need Rodgers to be there by May 27th, the start of OTAs. I know they're voluntary. I know he skipped some with the Jets last year. But if you want to be the new quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers, the face of the franchise, the leader, you got to put in the sweat equity. You can't just be sitting at home while the other guys are working and preparing for the season. And to get the playbook down, to build chemistry with teammates, to not force the other 90 guys on roster to ask questions about who's the starter. Who is Rodgers coming? You can't put those guys in that position. So I really, really would prefer, and if I had a deadline, it would be May 27th for Rodgers to come to Pittsburgh. I think he eventually signs. I don't know if it'll be before then or not. I would like it to be, but I think Rodgers will be the quarterback for 2025. And just a quick note, article I wrote this morning, Pittsburgh will have 5 different week 1 quarterbacks in 5 straight seasons, 2021 to 2025. First time in franchise history that will ever have happened. And of course, Pittsburgh, if it is Rodgers, we'll probably be looking at 6 quarterbacks in 6 years come 2026.
And show me another organization where you've had success with that amount of turnover at the quarterback position. I mean, straight up, if we're just being honest, real, and authentic here, Alex, that's my bigger concern, whether Rodgers comes or not. And that's also something, whether Rodgers comes or not, if it's Mason Rudolph, you're probably doing the same thing, even if it's Mason Rudolph. But show me another NFL team where they've done that same thing and had constant turnover at the most important position in sports and had success.
I've done a little bit of research on it, and you're right. It is not good company to keep. It's the 2013 to 2019 Cleveland Browns. It's the early 2000s Raiders and Chicago Bears. I mean, it is an ugly list. It's the Carolina Panthers post Cam Newton. I get when you transition post franchise quarterback, it gets messy. And usually what happens is this, Mark. Your franchise quarterback leaves, your team falls apart, everyone gets fired, new regime comes in, you build a thing ground up. Pittsburgh didn't do that. They were able to steady things enough, be a competitive 8, 9, 10 win team, make the playoffs a couple of times. So it's been a little different path for Pittsburgh. And I understand the value of it, not holding on to mistakes. They were right to trade Kenny Pickett. They're right to move on. If he's not the guy, he's not the guy. But to the broader point, you will not create the stability and consistency and Super Bowl contention success Pittsburgh desires until you find stability at quarterback. You can't play roulette and expect to have any sort of consistent results in terms of winning playoff games and making a serious run. So, even with Rodgers, how far does it get you? And even if it gets you a playoff win, you're starting probably from scratch in 2026. So obvious to say, but until Pittsburgh finds that long-term answer, likely in the draft, this team will continue to spin its wheels.
Effectively, what you're doing is retooling the engine of a broken plane while the plane's up in the air. I mean, that's what you're doing. We'll see with Rodgers and how all of that plays out. I do want to move on the defensive side of the ball. T.J. Watt entering the final year of his deal. Here's how I see this, Alex. And if I'm off base, hop in. But Myles Garrett gets a huge contract extension. $40 million average annual salary. Max Crosby's is 35.5. I think the floor of that conversation for TJ Watt starts where Crosby's deal is at. And I think it's either right where Myles Garrett is or maybe even surpasses it. I think he should be a one-hat player, but I also don't want to see the Steelers just outright lose TJ Watt and to see him walk away. I get that Father Time's undefeated, but even TJ Watt, he's battled some injuries the last few years. TJ Watt at 85, 90% is still better than probably the vast majority of edge rushers and defensive players in the NFL. How do you see all of this playing out, given the fact that Watt is entering the final year of his deal?
Short answer, I still Bleav Watt will get an extension. It'll probably take longer and be messier than it needed to be by the end of summer, by right before the start of the season. Watt will probably get it just like he did in 2021. But I think, Mark, Pittsburgh really dropped the ball here to not do this deal as soon as possible. They knew the edge market was going to heat up with Crosby, with Garrett, with Parsons potentially still down the road, Trey Hendrickson, although Hendrickson probably won't top Myles Garrett's number. Here's where it gets interesting with TJ Watt. I understand, Myles Garrett reset the whole market, like just totally blew every other number out of the water. If you're TJ Watt, do you want to take less than Myles Garrett, the guy that you're constantly compared to, both in the same draft class, both in the AFC North, when last year after Cleveland upset Pittsburgh, Garrett said, I'm number one, TJ, you're number two. Does Watt want to be number two contractually and have that reflected? If I'm TJ Watt, I'm not taking less than Myles Garrett. And that's a big, big number, probably larger than what Pittsburgh thought it would be to get Watt done, of over $40 million per year. So this one will get very interesting, I think. I don't think Pittsburgh expected to pay Watt 40 plus million, but it may take that.
Well, and if Parsons is the next domino to fall, if he's the next shoe to drop, and that surpasses Garrett, that's only going to drive Watt's number up even more.
Sure. I'm sure Watt had the expectation of whenever he signed his extension to become the highest paid edge rusher in football, as he did in 2021. Now, theoretically, I think if Parsons were to sign for, say, 41, there's a chance Watt would take a little bit less, take 40 and a half to become number two. I think he wants to be above Myles Garrett as a point of pride. That's a comparison there. That's kind of I don't know. I'm just kind of guessing, but that's my thought. I don't think Watt would want to take less. So this thing could take a while to get done, unfortunately. And again, I think Pittsburgh should have had this thing done in February, gotten Watt signed to $35 million per year, made him highest paid pass rusher in football. And then, by August, with all the other pass rushers getting paid, that deal would have looked like a steal.
Not to mention, I have a few thoughts about this, to where if the Steelers said, no, we're going to let you play your contract out and then try to wait till next offseason, if that upsets Watt to say, hey, I'm going to go ball out and I'm going to go make my money on the open market. And if you don't even come close to matching what I can make on the open market, just watch. Someone will pay him that money. Like someone is going to want TJ Watt's services.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever going to get to that point. I don't think Pittsburgh has a desire to
I hope not, Alex.
Sure.
Sorry.
But Pittsburgh's also kind of, I don't want to say back themselves in a corner, but they made it very clear they want to sign TJ Watt to an extension. That is an explicit goal to keep him, as you said, a one helmet player to play out his entire career in Pittsburgh. So you kind of have to get a deal done with him this offseason to not let those questions linger, and you may have to pay additional. I think Pittsburgh will literally and figuratively pay for their procrastination in getting this Watt deal done.
All right, keeping it on the defensive side of the ball, the Steelers double dipped at defensive tackle, taking Derrick Harmon in the first round. They get Iowa's Yahya Black as well. Why do you think the Steelers double dipped at the defensive tackle position in the draft?
Because Baltimore ran for 299 on them in a playoff game. And when your divisional opponent literally runs you out of your season, that's going to hurt. And that's not going to be forgotten once the offseason begins. Not to say that Yahya Black alone is going to solve all those things, but Pittsburgh had an aging defensive line that looked tired by the end of last year. Cam Hayward, as great as he is 36. He's going to play through 2026. You better infuse some youth, some talent, some run defense up front. And so Harmon at 21 is that classic, perfect Steelers 3-4 defensive end that is hard to find. And so he's going to have an impact right away. There's a ton of upside with him. I think Harmon can become an elite run defender and a very good pass rusher. And if you get those things, you have another really, really good anchor piece for this Pittsburgh Steelers defensive line. But yeah, very clear their offensive Their draft offseason focus was front seven, defensive line. And to just quickly kind of pivot back to what you talked about with vision, Pittsburgh's plan has been develop trenches. In the 2023, 2025 drafts, they've drafted 5 of their 6 first or second round picks have been offensive or defensive linemen. So it has been a very trench heavy focus. Offensive line, the first 2 drafts under Omar Khan and Andy Weidel, and then D line this year, and then quarterback next year is probably the big move. So you can understand that vision of build up your trenches the way the Eagles did, get the quarterback, and ride from there.
I'm still licking my wounds from the playoff loss, and it's like you mentioned the 299 rushing yards Baltimore had. To me, the drive that I just couldn't take it was it 13 consecutive rushes that Baltimore ran the ball, and there was nothing Pittsburgh could do to stop it.
Yeah, that is not how Pittsburgh built their defense for the last 50 years. And it's not just the Baltimore game. I mean, the run defense was at its worst in that game, but at the end of the season, that whole 5-game losing streak, there were a ton of problems offensively, defensively, special teams, but the defense looked tired. The Eagles game, Pittsburgh had the ball for 2 drives in the second half. I mean, just because the defense could not get a stop, the Eagles ran at will. I think they had the Eagles had the ball for the last 10 minutes of that game, and Pittsburgh just could not get a stop. And so I think all those things contributed to Pittsburgh really wanting to refocus, retool, and build up that defensive line, that front seven.
That Eagles game is a great example because Pittsburgh had 2 offensive possessions in the second half of that game. I mean, it's crazy to say out loud. I can't recall a game ever like that, but
Russell Wilson couldn't either on Hard Knocks. He was like, I never played in a game where I've had the ball twice in the second half.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I like the Harmon pick. I have a little bit of concern with the potential shoulder issue. Now, I know he's downplayed that. Mike Tomlin has downplayed that. Omar Khan has as well. I think you need someone to help Cam Hayward up front. I mean, Cam Hayward still playing all pro level football. Again, father time's undefeated, NFL not for long. And it's not a knock on Cam Hayward, but how long Pittsburgh can continue to rely on that. Alex, the analogy I've made on this show is when you go to your fridge and you check the milk and it's either nearing or at the expiration date, you go to smell it and it's like, oh yeah, this will still do the job. This is still pretty good. But how long you can continue to rely on that. I mean, I hope Cam Hayward plays for forever, but I want to get him some help up front. I love that the Steelers double dipped that defensive tackle because they're finally saying enough is enough. To me, for the NFL's highest paid defense, if you can't shore up the A gap and B gap, you render T.J. Watt useless, Alex Highsmith, hopefully trying to get Minkah Fitzpatrick back to an all-pro level on the back end. If a team can attack your A gap and B gap, the rest of those blue chip difference-making players, they don't have nearly as much effect because they're playing different gap responsibilities and they have different responsibilities for what you need to do defensively.
Defensive line coach Carl Dunbar, his phrase is you have to earn the right to rush the passer, which means stopping the run. And Pittsburgh could not stop the run effectively enough last year, and their pass rush wilted. Watt included, that pass rush was not strong enough late in the season. So you're right. Just 2 quick thoughts. You know, with Cam Hayward, he's played fantastic last year. Just a historically good season for a 35-year-old defensive tackle. And I still think will play really, really well in 2025. But his snap count and his snap percentage was the lowest it had been in a non-injury season since 2012, his second year in the NFL. So they have to monitor and reduce his snap count to some degree, which opens up the need for more snaps rotationally, which is where Derrick Harmon will certainly also play, not just in Pittsburgh's base 3-4, which is used only about a quarter of the time, but to rotate in with Benton and Hayward in nickel packages and then hopefully be his long-term heir. On Yahya Black, my only concern here is that Pittsburgh seems to be more focused on playing him at defensive end. That's what Dunbar had said. And I like him much better as a nose tackle. I think he's a space eater. He's not a horrible athlete, but the more he has to work out close to the tackle, the more space he has to play in, the worse the results are. And so I think Black has some deficiencies in his game, run defense, that have to get cleaned up. But I do understand the intent of trying to add depth, add competition, have the best defensive line possible come week 1.
All right, 2 quick things before we get out of here. Will Howard, the rookie quarterback out of Ohio State, what are your expectations for him?
Listen, I was super happy with the pick. Will Howard, I had a 2nd-round grade on him. He was my number 3 quarterback, so I was thrilled to get him in the 6th round. But I do want to sit here and say is that assuming Rodgers signs, Howard will be the number 3. He's not going to play a snap unless something terrible happens come the season. But I like his game. I like his makeup, his touch, his accuracy. I get the value of playing outside of structure and quarterbacks who can scramble and create. And Howard's more athletic than people give him credit for, but you have to play from the pocket. I think Howard can do that. He shows the touch, accuracy. He got better as the season went along. He had some tough moments earlier in Ohio State season against Michigan, against Oregon. But remember, he just transferred in. I mean, he just come into a new place, a power program like Ohio State. You're trying to become a leader, learn the playbook. You're going to take some lumps. He played his best football down the stretch. Love his makeup, his IQ. I'm sure you watched that Gruden quarterback class. He was fantastic on there. So I think there are starter traits with Will Howard. There's some exciting stuff with him. But I also recognize once the regular season begins, I mean, he'll be, a number 3 quarterback and hopefully not playing, because that means the guys in front are healthy and playing well.
All right. Last thing with the schedule release this week. I know there's some rumblings of which team the Steelers will play in Dublin. Is there a matchup? Because we know who the Steelers will play, but take this in any direction you want to. What are you most excited about this week with the schedule release? I want to see who Pittsburgh plays in Dublin, but what about you, Alex?
Yeah, I don't get as enthused by schedule release because everyone tries to map out wins and losses, and I have no idea what things are going to look like in week 16. So it's all just a pointless offseason fodder, which fair enough. I respect it. There's a lot of rumors about Minnesota being the Dublin opponent. I know Green Bay was the popular team earlier in the offseason, but I think the NFL would like to keep that stateside. To have a Rodgers Packers primetime matchup would make a lot of sense. So we'll see. But yeah, I want to see how the AFC North games get set up, because last year, remember, it was all at the end of the season. And so I imagine there'll be a little more balanced, a little more spread out this year. So I'll watch for that. But I kind of watch it like a player. Are there any holidays? Can I see my mom on Christmas? Those are the things I focus on when it comes to time to schedule release. So that we'll see on the Dublin game. That'll be a lot of fun.
Well, I'm going to have to pick wins and losses here on this pod, Alex. I don't even know if Rodgers is playing or not.
Right.
So it's like, if Rodgers is there, win. If Rodgers isn't there, who knows? He's the one and only Alex Kozora. Alex, if there's anything you need to plug over at Steelers Depot, the floor is yours.
Yeah, check us out, SteelersDepot.com. You can follow our Twitter account at Steelers Depot. I'll follow myself on Twitter at Alex_Kozora. And Mark, thank you so much for having me on.
He's the one and only Alex Kozora. I'm Mark Bergin. If you enjoyed Bleav in Steelers, 5 stars only on Apple and Spotify. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button on the Mark Bergin YouTube page. Thank you to Alex Kozora. I'll see you later this week for the schedule release. Until then, take care and so long, everybody.